So this is the iPhone SE, one of the cheapest newer iPhones you can buy in 2019. And while I've never personally owned this phone, I know a lot of people who have, namely my brother, my nan, my grandpa, and multiple friends of mine. So that actually got me thinking, is the iPhone SE the perfect general purpose iPhone in 2019, or should you look elsewhere? Let's find out. First of all, we have, as usual, the specs. One of the standout features of the iPhone SE were when it came to specs. Apple basically took the specs from the iPhone 6s and put them in the body of a 5s for a significantly cheaper price. Now, this means that the iPhone SE features the Apple A9 processor, 2GB of RAM. To be honest, neither of those are particularly mind-blowing for 2019, but as I said in my iPhone 7 review, specs are less important when it comes to iPhones. There's a tractor outside. This is mainly due to Apple's limited line of phones, so a mediocrely spec phone can perform really nicely if it's properly optimized. As I said, because they have such a limited line of smartphones that they need to work with, they can easily dedicate resources to do this. It's also pretty light, weighing in at just 113 grams, and this is so nice to see on a phone built with such premium materials. And I know this is most likely due to the size of the phone, but still, it is a nice thing to have. And I can personally appreciate how a phone built with such premium materials can be so light. Next, we have the build quality, and here's where the iPhone SE really starts to separate itself from being an okay phone and moves itself more into the premium category. The iPhone SE is made out of aluminium, not the 7000 series like we saw on the 7, just standard, but it also features glass accents. As I said before, I'm not a massive fan of phones with glass backs, and unlike on the 8 and 10, it doesn't actually add any functionality like wireless charging, but it does add a slicker look than a standard aluminium build, especially with this body shape. Again, as I said in my 7 review, the cost of repairing smashbacks can often be huge. So because of the glass accents, I would highly recommend keeping a case on your phone. A positive in the build quality though is what Apple refers to as the pure sapphire technology on the camera lens. As I've said before, there is some controversy around this technology, namely people claiming that it isn't actually pure sapphire, but in my experience, it works fantastically well. If you don't know what this pure sapphire technology is, it was basically introduced on the iPhone 5s, and Apple claimed that it basically makes your iPhone camera lens less prone to scratches. As someone who loves to use their smartphone for photos and video all the time, it's super important that my camera stays in good condition, and I'm pleased to say, despite the mentioned controversy, the lens has managed to stay super clean. One huge positive of the SE's build quality would have to be the camera bump, or lack thereof. Starting with the iPhone 6, Apple developed a nasty habit of adding a camera bump to their devices, which, while not the biggest deal ever, can cause some problems with overall durability as well as looks. This was the last iPhone ever released not to feature the camera bump, so overall, the build quality of the camera is actually really good. The iPhone SE has no official water resistance rating since it was released just before the iPhone 7, which was actually the first iPhone to receive an IP rating, so if you're planning on taking the SE into the pool with you, don't do that. It's a bad idea. Don't do that. I'll be talking more about the build quality of the actual screen later on in the review, but overall the iPhone SE feels premium but not all that durable, so I would recommend a case. The iPhone SE features a 4-inch screen with a resolution of 1334 by 750, which, while not sounding terrifically high, especially for 2019, is less of an issue because of the screen size. Because of the 4-inch screen, the iPhone SE has a PPI of 326, which is actually the same pixel density as the iPhone 7, so overall, the screen looks pretty good. A 4-inch screen in 2019 does feel a little weird, especially coming from either my iPhone 7 or my Galaxy S8, and I found that typing was a little harder, but with the iOS 13 update, I reckon this problem could very well be solved, and it's just something to be aware of for the time being. It's reasonably bright at 500 nits, the same as my 5K iMac, and while this is significantly dimmer than the current iPhones, the only place I've found that this phone struggles is in ultra bright outdoor situations, and in general, 500 nits is fine. I mean, it would be nice if the screen was a little brighter so you could see your colors better, and if you're planning to use Lightroom on your phone like I do with my current phone, then this might be a little bit of a problem, but otherwise it's absolutely fine. Something I really don't like though is the lack of Force Touch. Considering that the internals were otherwise the same as the 6S, the lack of Force Touch is disappointing, as it's one of my favorite features of modern iPhones. It's so convenient to be able to do something within an app without actually having to navigate the app. For example, making a tweet can be done in 1 click as opposed to 2. It may sound insignificant, and as I say it really sounds insignificant, but there's nothing like it, so it really is a shame that Apple decided not to add this feature. In terms of screen build quality, it's honestly pretty good. Now, as I said before, this is my brother's phone, and he's generally more careful than me, but there was an occasion where he was going downhill in his swagway, not quite a one wheel, but you know, Swagways are alright. His phone came flying out of his pocket, landed face down on a concrete hill, and somehow managed to not get cracked. After this, he did put a screen protector on his phone, but before this, nothing, and it was fine. It's also pretty scratch resistant too, and considering how he only put a screen protector on it 2 months into ownership, it's done pretty well to avoid scratches, so overall, the screen feels solid. In terms of button quality and placement, as I've said before, this is perhaps one of the strongest points of iPhones in general. They're very well mapped out, good quality, and nice and tactile. On the SE, I am pleased to say that this is no exception. There are 2 rounded, separate volume up and down buttons, which I much prefer over the 6 and 6S's connected volume bar, simply due to the accuracy. I found that with separate buttons, you get less mispresses, especially if you have a case on your phone like I do, and because you get less mispresses, this just leads to a more premium overall user experience. Next to it is a feature that, again, I wish was on every phone on the market. Simply put, the mute switch. Whenever you need to, literally at the flick of a switch, you can flip your phone onto silent mode, and as I've said before, I love this feature. Whenever I'm somewhere quiet and my phone goes off, I can simply flick the switch, and because of the tactility, again, I don't have to take my phone out of my pocket. It may not sound like much, but holy crap, it's awesome. The lock button's isolated on the top of the phone, just like on the 5S, so you never hit any other buttons by accident, like I have with many phones in the past, and it's just as tactile as the other buttons, so no complaints here. There is also, unlike any other modern iPhone to this date, a headphone jack. This isn't personally a huge deal for me, but I know a lot of people who do like the headphone jack, so it is just a nice to have. Following on, we have the home button. This is the classic physical home button, and honestly, it feels pretty great. Granted, I have got used to and enjoy the haptic home button on my 7, but there's just something nice about a traditional mechanical home button. Touch ID is fast, and of course, there are the usual perks of having a home button, such as easy cycling through apps, and of course, going home at the click of a button. It's an intuitive way to interact with your phone, and honestly, the physical element really adds to the premium experience. That's just my opinion though. I mean, you might hate it. Following on from this, we have the camera, which in my opinion, as well as a lot of my friends' opinions, is a really important part of the phone. The iPhone SE features a 12 megapixel main camera with an aperture of f1.8, and honestly, it's pretty good. The colors and sharpness are great out the camera, and I really think for most people, the quality will be nice. Obviously, due to the single camera, you won't be getting portrait mode, telephoto mode, or any crazy bokeh, so if you want any of those, I'd suggest looking over to the iPhone 7 Plus, but if you just want some casual snaps, then this should do the trick. The photos grade well too, and I found that LR performance on this phone is generally solid, and this is despite the fairly lackluster specs. Now, in my iPhone 7 review, I barely talked about this front-facing camera because it's 7 megapixels, which will generally get the job done in 2019. However, the front-facing camera on the SE is only 1.2 megapixels, which is extremely low for 2019. Honestly, it's not great, and I was a little bit disappointed considering the 6S had a front-facing camera with 5 megapixels. Compared to the rear camera, there's a clear difference, and when we compare a front-facing camera shot to one on the iPhone 7, the difference is night and day. Honestly, in 2019, I wouldn't be using the front-facing camera. I'd just flip my phone around and use the rear-facing camera. That said, if you're not one for camera quality, then it really doesn't matter either way. It's just a little disappointing to see a company that traditionally does really well in the camera department just slack off in this instance. Overall, the main camera though doesn't disappoint, and if you use the SE in the right way, then you should be able to get some lovely images out of this thing with no problems. When we get into video, the SE can shoot 4K video at up to 30 FPS, 1080p slow-mo at 120 FPS, and 720p slow-mo at 240 FPS. Just like on the iPhone 7, the 240 FPS is significantly lower quality than the 120p option, so I don't use it, like, ever. There's some crazy aliasing, and honestly, it looks a little too slow for my taste anyway, so if I can get a look that I prefer in a higher quality, then I'll be doing that. The 4K does look super nice, and while the camera app is still very bare bones for my liking, it's possible to get some very nice looking video with the iPhone SE. In fact, I've spoken before about using this phone, which is the iPhone 7, as my B cam in these videos, and this never disappoints me. And as the image is very similar, I'm sure I'd have no problem using the SE as a B cam too. So hey, if you need a cheap camera, why not just pick up the SE and save yourself on the point and shoot? The slow motion is good, but I've noticed there is slightly less dynamic range than with the standard 30p recordings, pretty common on any of the other smartphones that I've tested. I've also noticed a significant hit on the autofocus when you start to film at these higher frame rates, so if you need critical focus, again, I'd recommend downloading a third-party app such as ProMovie. Again, for the second time, they're not paying me to say this, I just really like their app, and if you want to take your iPhone cinematography game to the next level, then I would highly recommend checking it out. Overall, I'm very pleased with the SE's camera for video. It's solid not only for the price, but also for the age, and if you want to get some quick videos with your phone, then the SE might not be the worst choice on the market. Moving on to an area where iPhones usually do very well, The OS. It's an iPhone, so it's running iOS. And with this phone, I don't actually have the iOS 13 beta installed. I'm on the last stable release, which at the time of recording is iOS 12. Everything from the UI to the app performance has been absolutely solid with the SE. It does everything I want it to, from social media to gaming, and the performance of this thing in 2019 is absolutely solid. Generally, an iPhone will get 5 iterations of iOS, but the 5S got 6, so we'll have to see just how many this one gets. But if we're following the standard 5 iterations, then this means that iOS 13 will be the last official release of iOS on this phone. This means that Apple will support this phone into 2020, and this may or may not be a deal breaker for you. I'll leave that up to you, but this is an important consideration for you to make before purchasing the iPhone SE. As I mentioned before, this isn't actually my phone, it belongs to my brother, and he's had this thing for a good amount of time now, and according to him, the battery never fails to last him the entire day. This may be down to the lack of Force Touch, slightly dimmer screen, or the fact that he keeps his mobile data off literally all the time. That's crazy to me. Whatever it is, it never fails to last him the day. In fact, I've noticed that his SE often outlasts my 7 on days with extended usage periods. So it's fair to say, despite what some reviewers say, this thing is no slouch. Seriously, I remember reading a review that said this phone had bad battery life for not lasting 2 days. What phone lasts 2 days in 2019? This thing lasts a day. My S8 lasts a day. Even the Motorola G3 didn't last 2 days. So with that said, I think if a phone can last the day, then it's got solid battery life. Moving back to a physical element of the SE, how does the speaker sound? Obviously, it's not going to be a replacement for proper speakers or even headphones, which you can use wired ones because of the headphone jack. It's downfiring, and while it is only one, I have heard worse. And in 2019, for some quick listening, the iPhone SE speaker will definitely get the job done. So, do I recommend the iPhone SE in 2019? Well, it's a little bit complicated. I think for some people, the iPhone SE might not be the wisest choice. You might actually want to look into something like the iPhone 7, which I did a review of up there. I always lean back when I do that, like way too far. But for some people who want something that's just easy to use, a first phone maybe, a first introduction to the iPhone, or even people who simply just want a smaller iPhone, then this could be absolutely perfect. It still performs great, it still runs iOS, the build quality is phenomenally good, and of course it takes fantastic photos, so if you want those things in a small package, then the iPhone SE might just be for you. Alright guys, so thank you for hanging out with me today. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, and smash that subscribe button. Thank you so much for all the crazy support recently. That iPhone 7 video did so well. I'm done, and I will see you guys next time.
Rolled up in that big truck with them guns up for them fuck boys. Smoked out in that Rolls Royce, blowing dope with that bad broad. Shawty know what I got, cash, I'm throw it all if she want that. Every time you see me out, I blow trees out my blunt fat, cause I'm rich. Dumping the clip on a bitch, they hold her smoking, I exit the switch. Step to the mic, I live in the spit. She steady working it, twerk on the dick. I'm with the shit and I get it.